Welcome to The Secret Witch Show, the podcast providing a safe and alchemical altar space of conversations which help powerful women escape a half-hearted, spiritless society and rediscover the freedom of living a wildly magical life. Every other week, we explore how to cast aside the wounds of shame, guilt, and fear connected with fully being yourself, so you can grant yourself permission to stop hiding, ground soulfully back into your body, illuminate your whole soul desires, tend your soul, rediscover and reclaim your powerful gifts, express your magic, and manifest your wildest alchemy. There's no better place to become who your heart longs to be. This is where we will guide you into liberation. I'm your host, Nicole Barton, and I'm so excited to dive in. Welcome, darling magical ones. I love how I'm calling you that when you're clearly here doubting your magic. So let's dive into that in the episode in a minute. But firstly, I just wanted to share a magical offering that if you're here listening to this episode, may be in deep alignment for you. In November, the week of Samhain, as the veil is thin between the two worlds, I'll be guiding phosphoric women who, again, you'll understand a bit more about in this episode, into becoming their own healer. This is a medicinal journey of magic which will help begin to dose the 6 collective energetic remedies that are deeply healing for women to begin the journey back to their souls and learn to become their own medicine. If you're feeling some sort of stirring in response to this and you'd like to find out more, read more at www.nicolebars.co.uk/wild-apothecary. On The Secret Witch Show today, I dive into how and why women's doubt of magic is a common sign they may be a magical one. I explore the typical journey of a phosphoric witch in alignment with my new philosophy of the remedies of the wild, dosing healing for all the magical ones who are scared of being their magical medicine. In this magical episode, I share the common place my women begin their journeys, the deep, open-hearted sensitivity and layers of trauma from living in the linear mundane world that have magical ones armour up instead of believing in magic. And I talk to the magic versus science debate and how the fact that science hasn't yet explained magic doesn't mean it isn't real. Let's dive in. Welcome, magical ones, to the episode called How and Why Your Doubt of Magic is a Sign You're a Magical One. And this is a particularly special episode because I'm going to be talking to some of the philosophy that I've been creating recently around the remedies of the wild, and that's becoming more and more a really deep part of my philosophy here at Team Secret Witch. And to say how excited I am about that is just I can't describe in words. And I was speaking actually to my own soul guide just earlier around just how deeply honouring I want to be to the homeopathic philosophy that underpins much of the modern day work that I am doing with my women who are magical witches but often can doubt their magic. So we're going to be speaking to why that doubt of magic is often a sign that you are a magical one. I just really wanted to presence the deep magic that I have experienced in my years as a homeopath, as a soul guide, and just really honour the sacred medicine that underpins all of what I'm about to share today, and that is the magic of homeopathy, which has saved my life and the life of those in my family time and time again. I mean, actually, as I'm just speaking, my mum actually just sent me a message again saying, I've got this, what should I take? And it's I didn't even appreciate actually how much of a magical medicinal thing that was, that actually I'm always dosing someone with something. And it's really because I have walked that path myself, and I deeply trust and have come to a place of trust, because it's not always been the case that I've trusted this magic, but have this deep, deep trust in homeopathic medicine and the remedies of the wild, of course, which is what they are based on, is homeopathy. So, and I'm going to open by just speaking a little bit to having honoured that, to where women can be as they begin to walk this path, because actually where I'm talking about having that deep honouring sacred trust in homeopathy and magic, in the remedies of the wild, this isn't usually where my women will have been when they start to come into this journey. And I presence that because there could be several ways that my women join this journey. They could have either not explored magic at all. They could have always felt drawn to it. They may have dabbled in some things like Reiki or aromatherapy or things like that. They may have explored a lot of magic. They may well be homeopathic practitioners. I was actually just chatting to my own soul guide about this as well. Like, actually a big part of my work is that they can often be in this homeopathic industry, if you like, if I want of a better word. That sounds a very masculine word, but this kind of homeopathic field can often be one where women have gone into this journey of magic and they've like been totally immersed in homeopathy and then become a little bit disheartened. There's often a lot in the homeopathic world of kind of resistance about homeopathy in the wider world, in the wider culture. Homeopaths can like really be inspired to train in homeopathy and then become really despondent because actually the world doesn't value it as a magical practice, as a magical path. And so a big part of where my women can be, they can either have come where they haven't looked at magic at all, but they can also deeply looked at magic but become despondent because it's not widely accepted in the world. And so we can either doubt magic ourselves, or we can kind of come to doubt magic because even though we have slightly allowed ourselves to believe in it by training in it or whatever, we can also then go into doubt because it's not approved of. And so there's two places that my women typically come from, and that is either not having explored magic at all or exploring it and then feeling kind of despondent with it, like doubtful of it. So whichever one you are, know that this is a place where you can come to learn that magic is actually really magical and can be really magical and is actually very real. So yeah, where my women are commonly at is in that kind of doubting of magic, that not trusting magic, often suppressing magic, and that can really leave them feeling quite burned out because they are actually magical ones. We're talking here very much about the women who are phosphoric witches, so I'm going to go into that a little bit more in a moment. But typically phosphoric witches are magical, and their suppression of that is what has them feeling burned out. So instead of being magic and allowing their magic to flow and allowing themselves to believe and trust in magic and magic as a medicine, this isn't kind of, we're not talking about living a magical feeling life. We're not talking about feelings. We're talking about real technology, real magical technology here. Instead of allowing themselves to be in that and to be with that, they often come to a place where they're living in logic and they're choosing mundane things. They're choosing to be in the logical mundane world, and that might include them choosing things like very mundane fixes for their burnout. So they'll come to this place of feeling burned out and they might take that to the doctors. They might take sleeping tablets, they might take antidepressants, they might take hormone replacements, the pill. They might numb themselves with TV, alcohol, social media, working themselves into the ground, working harder. There's a lot of homeopathic practitioners who come into this feeling really inspired by magic and then kind of see that it's not accepted by the world and kind of go back out into that mundane world and even kind of working themselves into the ground as a distraction. And yet these are women who have typically been drawn to magic, have this deep, deep sensitivity. And they shame that sensitivity because it just doesn't feel welcome. So they again become to doubt their magic. So they suppress themselves, they suppress their body's signals, which are of course kind of giving them these magical signs and synchronicities. They suppress their feminine cycle. Their body will guide them into their magic, and if it's doing that, they have to suppress it. So often they will suppress their feminine cycle. They'll suppress their wild emotions as not acceptable. They'll suppress their brilliant minds. They'll suppress their heart's deep, true expression and shut these things down, because each of those things points them back as a reminder to magic. And they'll also likely feel weak. They can kind of feel like, how can magic be real if I'm creating chaos? Like, often my magical women will misuse their power to create chaos and destruction innocently, and that can leave them feeling like a failure. Like, well, how can magic be real if this is how my life is? There's often that sense of helplessness and powerlessness, and although that doesn't mean that you are helpless, it actually means the opposite. Again, we talk about how if something's missing, it's because it's there in the first place, and I'll talk to that a little bit more later. But essentially, my women aren't just meek and mild. So we talk about them feeling sensitive, feeling helpless, feeling powerless. And I just want to make it really clear, that does not mean that they are meek and mild. So phosphoric women are usually fiery. They will use their fire and that will express often in their kind of, if they're not in harnessing in control of their magic, they will end up using their fire as becoming a tyrant. And I know that because I've been that. They'll use it to rebel, and again, I've been that. They'll use it to create drama, me. And yeah, they may also completely do the opposite and just give up because they're so burned out from all of that. And yet they also have an affinity to the wild, but they think that's a bit weird, and so they ignore that too. So this kind of doubt all the time keeps them in this denial of their magic. And yet no one that isn't magical has to work that hard to suppress all of that, because it just doesn't even occur to them. And just speaking to phosphoric women, I've been birthing my path of Remedies of the Wild for a few months now, which is a philosophy that has really channeled through me, that, as I mentioned, has been created from that homeopathic lineage. And so I really couldn't more deeply understand the absolute sheer hatred even that people often have for the idea of magic. And I know this because in the past, when I've shared about homeopathy publicly, I've been called things like a charlatan for talking about homeopathy. And I have a really deep understanding of that being the reason why magical ones especially can suppress their magic. There's that deep fear of approval that can come in. But the thing is that not everyone is a magical one. So usually it's only those who are aware that they're pushing that away, or becoming aware that that's something that they're pushing away, that means in fact they are magical. If you weren't a magical one, you wouldn't even be in your field. And so my work is based very much around helping women who were born constitutionally as phosphorus. In homeopathy, we talk about how we come into the world when we're born as a particular constitutional type who is essentially here to live out a pattern of remedy relationships. And I firmly believe that that's because within the wounds of these relationships, we discover our unique gifts for the world. And the thing about phosphoric women is that they've come here to be magical ones. But because their gifts are hidden in their wounds, that makes it harder to access them. So it's easier often to suppress our gifts and shame them and stay in ignorance to our gifts, which can often look like moving to the opposite end of that pole, to rejecting magic. So let me tell you a little bit more about phosphoric women, because Phosphoric women are born deeply sensitive, as I said. They feel everything. They are like the princess and the pea. They can feel the pea under 100 mattresses. They can smell, I wrote a post saying this the other day, they can smell cheese in the fridge from upstairs. They will be overstimulated by bright lights and loud noises, and they'll need a lot of time to themselves. They'll also have a deep, deep sensitivity to other worlds. They're also, because they're open, they're really, really good at speaking themselves. So they're also open to all the fears, especially of the dark and eerie. So they're so wide open as an energetic kind of being that they are easily distracted by fear. And yet they also feel deeply, deeply drawn to magic. So of course they're open, they're sensitive, and then they get overwhelmed by the fear of that deep, otherworldly magical connection they have. And let's talk about the openness a little bit more too, because it's something that often has phosphoric women quickly learn to shut down. So phosphorus is born as a constitutional type with the widest open heart you can possibly imagine. They're hopeful, they're big-eyed, they're dreamy, their hearts are just wide open with love. They're really loving little souls as children, and they're bursting with energy. They're drawn to everything, really effervescent. They kind of light up the room as children. But over time, as they're kind of in this mundane modern world, they then begin to have experiences where they learn that this openness and sensitivity just isn't welcome. They learn that our culture isn't one to support vulnerability, isn't one to support open-heartedness. In fact, it's one that often shames all of that. So they quickly go into what I call trauma states, which kind of layer over their core. And instead of being this open, vulnerable, sensitive, magical soul, they armour up so that they aren't exhausted from resisting what's the resistance to magic. And yet that's like really, if a woman that's phosphoric doesn't see that deep sensitivity and open heart as a gift to be loved and allowed to express and consciously harnessed in a way that's not going to exhaust her, it's really inevitable for a phosphoric woman in a mundane world to become armoured and exhausted. So naturally, the phosphoric woman closes her heart, she armours herself, and in doing so, she denies the magic that went with all of those beautiful qualities. So she closes her heart, she goes into the logical world, and she stays there feeling exhausted by it, but too traumatised and largely unconscious of her possibility to reconnect to who she came here to be and who she was born to be. And as I said earlier, that can make her sound a little bit meek and mild. So I want to speak to that too, because this woman, this constitution, her soul is anything but meek and mild, even if it does appear that way outwardly. So in homeopathy, we dose, and I dose very differently here in this path to other homeopaths. Traditionally, homeopathy is dosed via medicine. I dose it energetically to my women. But the principles are the same. So we cure based on like cures like. So if we look at phosphorus as a remedy, it's the substance really that is essentially on the end of a match. And a phosphoric soul, in her healthy, full expression of that core, is a powerhouse. She's essentially fire. So she's literally as alive and alight as the ignition of a match, and she will burn with passion if she loves herself enough to allow herself to, if she's done all the healing to return herself to who she came here to be. So she is far from meek and mild. She's instead this burning ball of passion and desire, and she's come here with a soul mission. She's here to shine a radiant, effervescent light into the world, to guide the way. She's literally the torch for other lost souls who are in a trauma response to the mundane world. As they heal themselves, that's what they're able to be. And she's here to be literally heart wide open, leading in this beautiful, loving, feminine way. She's a magical fireball. But in her trauma state, which sadly is where most women go, because this isn't a conscious thing as we're born, although if you're like my little baby girl, I'm much more conscious of this, so I'll be dosing her energetically throughout her life. But yeah, in our trauma states, as we have come to this point, when a phosphoric woman has been kind of layered over with these trauma states, with these remedy states, things like being disapproved of, fearing losing control, longing for security, all these things can manifest in all sorts of ways. So for example, the traumas with a lowercase t could be being told that you're not powerful, being laughed at for your open heart. They may feel like traumas with a capital T. And things like trying to fit into a mundane world that doesn't suit her. All of these things can be traumas. Looking after everybody else first. All of these things add layers to our onion, if you like, add layers around our core that stop us from being this full, unique expression of ourselves that we came here for. And it's likely that her sensitivity will be suppressed. She might push through becoming a tyrant or creating chaos, as we mentioned earlier, or she might give up entirely and just feel burned out. Again, that fire's burned out. She's now exhausted. And all of these things are layers of trauma that shroud over her beautiful, magical core. And just thinking about that, my heart really, really bleeds for the phosphoric soul who's in there denying her magic, denying her power, feeling traumatized. And that's also where I've been. I was born as a phosphoric magical one, and that has been my journey. I was very much in the mundane life up until, decades ago, when I began to journey with all of this. And it's brought me to this place of being able to guide women in their own journeys. And yeah, so much healing, so much healing with this. So this is essentially how a phosphoric one, who is a magical one, she's one of the kind of phosphoric, one of the homeopathic remedy types, the remedies of the wild, who learns to completely deny her magic, and that's completely innocent. And she is exhausted from this constant struggle and just fits right into the mundane world and what's expected of her, which means that she has to reject her magic altogether because it's not welcome. And she also, despite that, because of this fire, still somewhere deep down, even if it's like really, really suppressed, she will still often have this sneaky sense that she's here for more, that she's here for magic, even if she has this love-hate relationship with it. And I suspect if you're here listening this episode, that is likely you. That's likely why you're here listening. And as I said earlier, you really can only miss something if it was there in the first place. I remember once my own soul guide said this to me about joy, because I was really feeling resistant to joy being my essence and was wanting to work with the word play instead, which felt much more easy to embody. And yet I could really deeply feel the truth of the fact that we can only miss something that was there already. And this is the case with women who doubt magic and deny magic and still have this sense that magic is something that is part of them, that is real, and yet they still deny it. And we can only miss something or doubt something if it is already there. And the significance of that for magical ones is that you can only miss your magic if it was there in the first place. So how can we doubt something that was once already there? And really, that kind of rejection of magic and going into logic, when we come to look at it really fully and truly, it's actually a trauma response. And that sounds like a bold statement, but essentially anything that has us move away from who we were born as, who we came here to be, our true nature, is something that is a trauma response, a fear response. And you can see why it's so easily understandable at the same time that a sensitive soul, when she comes across the doubt of a society that just doesn't approve of or believe in magic, who are really doubting who she is and rejecting who she is, that she would also reject magic entirely. And often at this point, this is when a woman who's phosphoric will go into logic. As I mentioned, this is where my women often are when they arrive at my door, really in their heads, really not trusting anything or anyone. They may even have felt like magic hasn't been working for them, and that's largely because they haven't worked with it consciously, which is how we learn to harness real magic. So they may have dabbled in magic, they may have learnt some skills, but they've not really consciously learned to harness it and become their medicine. So one of the biggest things that I help my women do in the early stages of this path is to reconnect back to their hearts and their souls, and really that's all the work that we do in this path. But the beginning steps are really that allowing, that giving permission for you to just reconnect back to your heart, and to let that, to begin to let that choose for you instead of your head, because essentially you have been conditioned to choose out of magic by listening to logic, and that is a trauma-based response. It's not just a simple, oh, I'm just going to follow my logic. It's not just a simple, I've been conditioned into logic. It's actually a trauma and fear-based response that revs up your nervous system to think about choosing who you are. And many of my women can feel symptoms in their bodies because of that. Maybe they have heart palpitations, maybe they have digestive problems, maybe they have feminine pains. And all of that body wisdom, all of that deep, magical body wisdom gets dismissed because magic isn't welcome. And it seems counterintuitive to lean into that and kind of, experience that and love ourselves and kind of tend our nervous systems in that, because essentially it's quite a difficult choice to lean into when we're having those symptoms, when we're feeling that like, oh God, this is really uncomfortable, to choose magic instead of logic. It's kind of counterintuitive to lean out of control, out of logic, but where we feel safe. But it's also what's required in the most loving way possible, because without leaning into it, we can never liberate ourselves from being in that place of just trusting logic and living our true deep soul purpose, which is who Phosphoric women particularly, they have come here to live that out. And it's especially important to them compared to other remedies. And that's why I do the work that I do. It's why I help women to learn to heal themselves with the deepest of love and become their own medicine. And that's essentially what these women need, is medicinal healing, but like ancient medicinal truth, the ancient medicinal truthful healing of the remedies of the wild. And where they've previously looked for that healing, of course, makes perfect sense, in their burned out, exhausted, tender, burdened state, is in logic and science. They have been outsourcing their healing power to science, to logic, and usually, in my own experience and that of my clients, with very little success. My own experience of being in this place when I had chronic fatigue was that literally no one in the medical system believed that there was anything wrong with me. In fact, I remember distinctly one doctor asking me, are you sure you just don't want to work? And if you know anything about me, if you knew me back then, if you know me now, that is definitely not the case. Like, I live for what I do. It's like a way of life, me being of service to women who are magical, helping them become their medicine, is what I live for. And yeah, there's no way that I didn't want to work, although at the time I was in a layer of my own onion, my own kind of remedy fear, my own trauma-based response of being in a job that was expected of me. And yet I still had the same devotion, the same dedication to that as I do to this work. And that is what burned me out, because I essentially wasn't choosing something that was in deep alignment with my Phosphoric Witch. And so yeah, nobody believed really that there was anything wrong with me. It felt to them like I was putting it all on. And usually I hear similar comments, like no one could tell me what was wrong with me, from my women, because although science is wonderful, and just to be really clear, I am not dismissing logic and science. Like, there are so many benefits, so many advancements, so much expansion from science that is so wonderful. And science can't really help magical ones who are suffering from trauma, from not being themselves. And this is also important because the remedy relationship that Phosphorus has come here to live out is that of learning to become their own medicine. And I'm going to come to that maybe. But essentially, we so often outsource our own innate capacity to be our own remedy because of this doubt that we are magical ones and that we can heal ourselves if we just begin to tune into what our body wants us to know. And yet, time and time again, that's what I've done. I have healed all sorts of physical ailments. I healed my chronic fatigue syndrome twice with homeopathy. I healed my paralysed face. I healed my thyroid. I healed my pre-diabetes after having gestational diabetes at a time when I was giving birth and very much in my logic rather than my deep phosphoric witch nature. All of it healed with medicinal magic. And yet we are taught as a society that because we can't measure this magical way of being with science, that it's not possible. And we've got some magical guests lined up to talk to this subject. And I was actually recording with next fortnight's guest yesterday, funnily enough. But what is helpful to remember is that science essentially created its own paradigm for how it measures things, and it's one that doesn't really do well with measuring the remedies of the wild earth or its homeopathic lineage. And this is the very challenge that often stops magical ones from allowing themselves to journey into their magic. This is why they doubt magic, because they're looking for a scientific paradigm which is often reductionist and not looking at the whole to measure something that isn't linear and logical. And it's not something that can be measured just in that way. It just doesn't work. But that doesn't mean that medicinal magic doesn't work. It works. And still, it only works when we consciously invoke the remedies. And that's the important thing that I've come to see, is that it's really important that we work consciously with invoking the remedies. That is the critical thing that I've seen as I've been developing this philosophy and deepening the work of homeopathy. And if we took a study of homeopathy and, for example, as science would want, if we got everybody taking the same remedy to reproduce results, it just wouldn't work, because that isn't how homeopathy works. We're all unique souls. We all came here to live out different unique experiences. And whilst there are some collective remedy relationships that phosphoric women typically live out, there are all still unique remedy states that they are also here to live out. And so dosing a random population of people who all have different constitutions, different remedy relationships with the same remedy to kind of test the efficacy of the remedy just wouldn't work, because they may not need that remedy. It's not taking into account people's uniqueness, people's journey through life, people's souls, and the remedy states they came to live out. And it's also unlikely that as part of this way of working, these people would be taught, if they were part of this experiment, they would be taught to magically invoke the energetic medicine. They'd simply be taking it unconsciously without any conscious intention. And this is partly the reason why this is important, is because often my magical ones will arrive at my door. As I said, some of them homeopaths, some of them magical ones who have trained in stuff that is magical, some of them not done any work with magic at all. They'll often be a little bit disheartened with magic. And that's largely if they've been using it because they've been using it unconsciously and they've not really been using it with intention, which again is innocent. It's not something we're taught, but we can kind of which can leave them essentially just playing and dabbling in magic rather than honouring it as the magical technology it truly is. And that's what is quite unique about this path. We're talking about serious, real medicinal magic here. It's not something to be played with. And again, that's completely innocent, because magic is taught to us as something that's unobtainable, impossible, something to pretend to believe in, something that maybe even practitioners don't fully believe in as they're dosing it. And again, it comes back to that dominance of a logical culture that values knowing, that values only science. And that doesn't mean that one way to view magic is correct. So one of my favourite things, by the way, about science is that science is really essentially working to look for the answers to things that it can't yet explain. So for me, that means science is essentially trying really hard to explain magic, which means that magic is everything science cannot yet explain. And there are studies, by the way, that do work towards measuring homeopathy effectively. Things like the Emoto water experiments and people following that way of being, which show how water can hold essentially a specific memory of the energetic of whatever substance it was exposed to, which is ultimately how homeopathy and the remedies of the wild work. Or rather, is how traditional homeopathy works. I dose my remedies energetically. But I digress a little bit there. So the point is that magical ones learn to doubt magic because they're taught that it isn't possible to prove it. And there's this kind of temptation to want to know, to control. And that's essentially because there isn't the technology to measure it and prove it yet. And the technology that we use to try is not really suited to the philosophy of magic. It's being judged by something that decided the parameters of measuring something scientific. And this is kind of one of the key things that my women have to learn, especially as they descend more into the feminine essence of phosphorus, because essentially that softening and opening that we do in this path is very feminine. It's that very kind of feminine magic, soul, and phosphorus, and this whole path really is all full of paradox. The feminine is full of paradox, magic is full of paradox, soul is full of paradox, phosphorus is full of paradox. All of life is full of paradox, and we don't learn to hold that paradox in mainstream life. So even an example of that is the paradox that can both love science for what it's creating, whilst also knowing and accepting and loving cleanly that it just can't yet measure what we know to be deeply true about magic, what we feel and experience to be deeply true about magic. And that's okay. Like that's something that many magical women struggle to get to a point of saying, like, it's okay that people resist magic. That is welcome. And I say that like deeply cleanly because I know for myself, my full whole-bodied experience of magic is that it's real. And the biggest paradox and irony of all, and the one that will have magical women reject and suppress her magic instead of being who she came here to be, is that if you are a magical one, you will also simultaneously likely doubt and suppress your magic. That is another paradox. And it's because of the trauma and the fear response that magic isn't welcome, and the conditioning that if it isn't logical, it's not right. Yet you'll also likely feel that something is missing. If you're living in the world of suppressing your magic, you'll feel a tug, you'll feel some kind of bubbling, burning desire for more. And you will notice signs and synchronicities showing up that you often dismiss. You will love and hate magic simultaneously. And that in itself is a sign that you're a magical one, because no one who isn't magical will feel this tug. It's also likely that you're listening to this now and you're like, yeah, okay, that makes sense. And I still feel some objection to this, because if I know anything, I know that my women, when they come to see this, will still wobble. It's not like you're going to see this and be like, oh, okay, cool, I can trust magic. They will doubt the truth. They will doubt the path. And most likely their tyrant will come out. And sometimes that tyrant will also doubt me, which of course I will love you deeply in. And still, for your own good, I'll invite you to choose through that fear, because doubting the path continuously is not serving for anyone. But it's absolutely okay to get to this point and be like, oh my God, I am a magical one, but can I really trust this? This is typical of Phosphorus. Remember, she's been so open in the past that she's been burned by the world and learned to close. This is completely innocent. This is a fear response. But essentially, any closure to trust is really a closure to trusting the fullness of yourself. So what I'd say to you at this point is that you have two choices. Now we've made that conscious, now you've illuminated that you are quite possibly a magical one, a phosphoric witch. You can either choose to stay in the security of where you are, which I suspect, if you're like I was, will feel mind-numbingly dull, trapping, full of tension, full of fear. Or you can consciously choose to soften, open your heart, and begin the journey of trusting in your magic. And that will likely feel edgy. As I mentioned, it's likely to feel activating to your nervous system. But the work is to be able to heal and love yourself in the activation of your nervous system so that you can choose into the freedom, the expansiveness in your body of becoming who you really are and loving yourself, accepting yourself. It will feel way more loving, more opening, more full of possibility to choose to soften and trust in your magic. And notice as you're feeling into those two choices, notice in your body, how does each of those choices feel? And either way, whether you choose consciously or not, you will be making a choice whether to keep rejecting your magic, which again, if you choose that, is absolutely fine. That's absolutely perfect, as long as you're choosing it consciously, knowing what you're choosing instead. Or you can begin to love yourself for your magic. And that's not an overnight thing that you just choose and be like, right, I'm going to choose that. Now I love myself. That is not what I'm saying. Like, there is deep, deep work in that. There's deep, deep work to come to love yourself. But that deeper energetic choice is going to unfold that for you, because that's how magic works. We make the commitment and magic happens. I think I've shared that quote from Terence McKenna about that feather bed. Like, we make the commitment and we free fall into our feather bed. And the benefits for my phosphoric witches of choosing that deeper energetic choosing in their hearts to lean into their magic, whatever that looks like, because more, as I said, will always be revealed if you more deeply and energetically choose to open your heart, will be that little by little, as you keep committing and recommitting to believing in your magic, you will begin to heal those layers of trauma that we talked about. The layers of trauma that want healing as you return to your core. And you will learn to come to love yourself more deeply for who you are. You'll learn to approve of yourself and choose what is right for you instead of seeking that approval elsewhere. And you'll learn to embrace the mystery. You'll learn to heal on all sorts of layers, all of those layers that will free up your core. Your energy will be freed up as you unsuppress yourself. And yes, there may be costs to that which are important to consciously choose and allow yourself to open to. But most importantly, if you allow yourself to believe in magic, you will have granted yourself permission to stop resisting who you came here to be and allow yourself to return to who you were born as at your core. Ultimately, you'll be choosing to believe in your magic. You'll unsuppress the deep desires that you have hidden to live life as your full expression, and you'll come to understand and discover and eventually speak, live and breathe your truth, which is where I've arrived at. And you'll come to understand, and of course, by the way, that's not me saying I'm complete. There is still work for me always to be done. So just to share that, because women are often like, great, you've completed this. That is not true. And it's really important to me for women to know that, like, I am walking the path ahead, and there's still more. There's always still more to be seen, to be healed, to be loved. And you'll come to understand that what that deep burning desire is that you've always felt that you're here to live out, that's kind of been suppressed hidden. We don't call the Secret Witch podcast the Secret Witch for no reason. She is a secret witch. She's here as a magical one with some secret desire that she wants to live out, but she's hiding because magic is scary to her. So she's suppressed it all this time, but there's that burning desire of her fire, who she's here to be, that's been bubbling away and it's been hidden. That's what's on the other side of that choice. And you will learn to become your own healer. You'll learn to heal these layers yourself. You'll learn to reclaim your power. And yeah, eventually, I suspect, given you're here, you'll likely discover what your unique medicine is for the world. Because my women are often here to not only learn to become medicine for themselves, but also for others. And that's often what their burning desire is. It's often why sometimes women arrive at my door having trained in medicine, but they haven't really fully learned to take it themselves so that they can become it. There are places where those layers are still there, and yeah, they're here to learn to dose themselves so that their deepest wound becomes their gift. They can help others who have experienced their deepest wounds. And you choosing that will be you healing all the fear that is held in your body like tension. It's possibly quite possibly even like ancestral tension that's kind of woven into your cells, kind of ancestral layers that are wrapped around that core that want healing as well. And all of that is so possible as you learn to heal yourself so that you can become free. And as I said, I'm not saying that that's an easy journey, especially for a magical one who doubts her magic. It's like you kind of need to have done the course to walk the path in order to choose it. Again, that paradox. So you may want a guide to hold you. And if you do, you're welcome to join us in Invoke Your Wild Apothecary, which is our crucible to help phosphoric women begin to learn to become their own healer, which is running in November. And just to say, that's also not compulsory, because it's the deeper commitment that matters, and more will be revealed to you about your next steps in that deeper energetic choosing of allowing your magic. So it's absolutely not necessary, but it is an option, and an option that will collapse time in your journey if you would like to be guided into your magic and learn to love yourself in your doubt. So links will be in the show notes for this. If you visit nicolebarton.co.uk/wild-apothecary, you will find all the details there. But really all that is required essentially is that you allow yourself to trust that your open heart is welcome, loved and safe, and to be in hope. So yeah, gorgeous. I'm just thinking of the ripples that all these phosphoric women will choose to life. I mean, if everybody was choosing to be the phosphoric witch, imagine how beautiful and open and sensitive the world would be. Gorgeous. So there were some questions that were asked in reference to this episode, which of course was chosen by women in the Secret Witch Circle group on Facebook, which you're very welcome to join so that you can get involved in choosing a topic that I speak to in solo episodes. And I'm going to speak to just a couple of those questions here. So the first one was, are some of us more drawn to magic than others? And I loved this question because essentially, absolutely, that is absolutely the case. There are many different homeopathic remedies. In fact, there are over 3,500 remedies of the wild, and only some of those are seen as constitutional remedies, but there are still many constitutions that we can be born as. Some might be phosphorus, some might be calcarea carbonica, some might be lycopodium, some might be sulfur, and not all of those, although sulfur is, not all of those are magical constitutions. So other examples of magical constitutions might be something like sulfur, which will typically live out a completely different set of remedy relationship patterns. So sulfur, for example, if you're constitutionally sulfur, again, this is kind of more of a male energetic remedy, it feels to me, but sulfur is the great philosopher. They appear quite lazy. They've always got their head in a book. And yeah, that is a magical remedy type that could be a constitution that is magical, but some of the others aren't. Some of the others maybe are senicum, like a podium, may not be. So only really certain remedy types are magical ones. And phosphorus I've seen, again, most homeopaths are typically phosphoric in their constitution, because again, the women who come to train in magic, the women who come to be interested in magic, tend to be that open, sensitive, phosphoric constitution. It's just how I've seen. This is a pattern I've come to see as I've worked with my women, which I've always been looking kind of remedy wise without really realizing. This is why I'm making the work conscious now. This is always how I've worked. I've always identified my women. I may not have told them. I've always been assessing them energetically where they are in terms of remedy types. And I just began to spot that my women who are witches, they resonate with the secret witch path, especially female witches, are tending to be phosphoric. And that makes sense because we always serve the women who are like younger versions of us, and I am of course phosphoric constitution, so it's really making sense why I've been creating the path to serve these particular women. But yes, absolutely, some remedy constitutions, phosphorus and sulfur especially, are going to be more drawn to magic than others, and other remedies may be more drawn to other things. So typically magical women will resonate with phosphorus or sulfur, and especially women, I think, is more the tendency towards phosphoric constitution. And the next question, which ties in quite nicely, was when many of us have innocently felt the pull to choose out of our magic through fear, what distinguishes those who are perhaps just on a different path? Are some souls here to embody their soul's truth, whilst others may have a different purpose on earth? Is magic not everyone's soul path? Is it just in the choosing in or out? And that was a really powerful question, because again, there's often women will feel that wobble as they're kind of choosing into their magic, which I referenced earlier. And it's really helpful to be able to answer this based on the last question, because ultimately there's only really one path. There's only really the path of one philosophy. There's only really the path of whatever constitution you came to be. The work is always to return to who you were born as and heal the layers that are clouding your true nature, your soul. And if you think about that as kind of the layers of an onion, we're all here with that core, whether that's a phosphoric core, whether that's a sulfuric core, whether that's a lycopodium core, whether that's an arsenicum core, whatever your core is, the path is still to return to that. And it's just for magical women especially, there's more of a kind of need, there's more, perhaps more layers, because they're just so sensitive. But essentially the work is always to return to who you were born as and heal those layers that are clouding your true nature. And of course, it's also important to see that we're all here with different soul purposes. So for phosphoric witches, that is usually magic, and they will all have all the resistance to that soul path. Whatever our soul path is, we usually have some sort of resistance to it. Otherwise, everybody would be living from soul. And yeah, it's really not that easy. Yeah, that's why it is what it is. But for sulfur, for example, it could be that they're here to be a philosopher. For arsenicum, they may be really well suited to the mundane world. They'd be great accountants, and that might be their soul work. And yet what pulls us all away from our soul path is essentially the layers of deep trauma. So if you think about yourself, as I said, as that onion with your soul's deep calling and purpose at its core, and think of that as who you were born as, then through life you experience trauma, you experience layers that build up for each of those traumas to cloud your essence. And essentially, until you heal and work with them, you're creating and living in fear. And so the work is to love and heal each of those layers of fear and trauma until you can return to who you came here to be and live consciously as that. If you feel a call to choose out of who you came here to be, it's really important to lovingly remember that this is just a trauma response that wants some deep love and tending, so that you can really be and become who you came here to be and return to that core. And having said that, it's also important to see that all of it is perfect, that we have come here to live out these experiences as part of our soul's contract, that we agreed to live these experiences out to discover our purpose. So there's no wrong making. It all just wants love. It's all trauma. It all has a purpose, because usually, and especially this is true for magical ones and phosphoric witches, our gifts are hidden in those wounds. So we are all here overall to embody our soul's truth. And it really is just a case of choosing it. And many people won't. Many people will not choose it. It's likely only magical ones that choose it. And that is why being a magical one is so, so special and so important and so needed in the world. Yeah, that feels a really, really good place to end. I would love, as always, to hear what comes up to you in response to this episode. And yeah, please do join us in Secret Witch Group if you feel the call to. That's another great aligned action if you want to deepen into this path. Yeah, we'd love to have you in our beautiful sisterhood. It is really a magical, authentic, truthful, loving community that's building and growing in our Facebook group. You're also very welcome to join us for Manifesting with the Moon, which is where we kind of open to the path. It's our free circle at new moon, so please do feel free to join us for that as well. I can't remember whether they'll have been Manifesting with the Moon around the time of this release or not, so if you just missed it, then sorry. Join us in the group. We do it every month, but if it's coming up, then enjoy. But yeah, let me know what has arisen for you in this episode. I'd love to hear. And yeah, if you feel called to join us or feel called to explore joining us, see whether it's aligned to join us in Invoke Your World Apothecary in November, please do take a little look at that. And I look forward to guiding you deeper into your magic. Beautiful. It's my vision to have all the magical ones just being their gift, being their medicine, healing the world. So yeah, so much gratitude for this homeopathic lineage in the Remedies of the Wild. I'm going to leave it there, wrapping you all in love. And I always say, something I've been saying a lot recently to my clients is we can often kind of just move on when we've listened to a podcast and go on to the next thing. But actually what I've been speaking here, part of my own medicine is to energetically dose medicines, remedies. And half the time that is being done by me bringing a remedy alive. So I'm very conscious about when I'm intentionally dosing remedies, but usually there is some sort of remedy dosed within what I'm saying. And my sense is that because we've been talking about phosphorus, today there could be some healing in the energetic of phosphorus. So if you have been listening, if you are kind of allowing that to sink in, the invitation is to allow that to trickle through your cells. So drink lots of water, go gently, and just allow yourself to be with the medicine that is here in this episode, because yeah, there's so much and so much deeply healing power in just this episode. So it just felt really important to presence that before we complete. Yeah, beautiful. I will catch you next time, my loves. Enjoy. Well, that was a medicinal episode as ever. Here are my takeaways. Only true magical ones suppress and feel deep resistance to magic, because it wouldn't even occur to them if it wasn't in their field. Likewise, we can only notice that something is missing because it was there in the first place. So if you're feeling you miss magic, it's likely it was always there. Magical phosphoric women are so deeply sensitive and open that when they come across the criticism of magic from the mundane world, they often immediately shut it down, armour up, and close off to their souls, which results in them denying magic. This is one of the great paradoxes of being a magical one, that in the early phases we have to learn to both love magic and also be okay with not always loving it due to our trauma responses and fear as we heal. The conditioning to deny magic and choose and favour logic, which underlies their armour, is actually a trauma response to the phosphoric woman's fear of her sensitivity and openness. There are lots of things that can layer over a magical one's core and stop her believing in her magic. The deep work is to love ourselves in that. Science is wonderful and, like everything, has a point where it isn't all the everything. Science, by its very nature, is here to try and explain the unexplainable. So magic is everything that science has not yet explained. There is always doubt in magic for magical ones, and ultimately you have a choice. You can continue to live as you are in logic and control and in the mundane world, or you can follow your deep burning fire and passion and grant yourself permission to be magical and medicinal. This isn't easy work, but it's well worth it to be who you came here to be.
If you'd like to get the show notes and links for everything we've chatted about in this episode, head to www.secretwitch.co.uk. If you know a secret witch who would love this episode, please share with them to help them liberate themselves. And so you don't miss out on next week's episode, head to your podcast app of choice and hit subscribe. Thank you so much for listening. I'll see you next time.